All right, today I'm looking forward to getting into this. I will be talking about Submission by Michel Houellebecq, translated by Lorin Stein. And the reason I'm reading this book is because after finishing The Prisoner of Heaven, I decided to give the House of the Spirits one more try to continue off from where I was, and within 10 pages I was utterly bored and just decided to give up on it. And after that, I was going to try and loophole my rules a little bit, because I thought that I had a copy of All the Lovers in the Night by Mieko Kawakami in the donate pile, because I already own a copy of it in the States. But turns out I did go ahead and ship that one because it was a paperback reading copy, and the one that I have in the States is more of a hardcover preserved copy. So, shit. Pretty much for that plan. So, with nothing really that I was looking forward to pick up next, I decided to just read another Houellebecq because it's short, and like I said, the map and the territory, it was interesting, but I didn't really know where to go with it, and I just grabbed whichever one was off the top of the pile, which turned out to be Submission, which is Houellebecq's big controversial story, the one that I think comes up a lot when people talk about his Islamophobia and whatnot. But if there's one thing that I really had when I was reading the map and the territory, which you'll recall, it was Houellebecq's statement about how everybody who's read his work has already made up their mind. And even just looking at the insane number of quotes and blurbs on Submission, you've got 4 on the front cover of my copy, and then let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the inside cover, and let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the back cover, and which makes for a total of, let's see here, 12 plus 6 is 18, so 18 quotes on the book itself, which is really insane. But a lot of people have things to say about this book, and the funny thing is that the quotes range from captivating by the Daily Mail and oh god, who is it? Michael Gove? Yeah, Michael Gove, who I do know enough about British politics to know who Michael Gove is. Who take this as a very realistic portrayal of the future. And then you have like Jonathan Lethem, who one of his books I read I really like, so I was really surprised to see his quote in here, but he attributes it to Houellebecq jerking everybody's chains and being a provocateur and whatnot. So it's not just I think really more than absolutely any other book, this is one where if you know who Houellebecq is, there's a lot of determining what type of book this is, whether you should take it literally, whether you should take it as satire, a lot before the bat going into it. And for me, like I said in my last review, I felt like I didn't really know where I felt with Houellebecq, and that the only way that I was able to get through the map, or that I really had forced myself through the map and the territory in order to get more of a sense of the author, and that by the end of it, I didn't know where I felt on it. And after reading Submission, I feel my sense of Houellebecq is that he is very much an author who believes what he is writing, but that he says it deliberately in the most provocative and offensive way possible, which, being a left-leaning individual, is very going to go against a lot of the views of Europe, which is a lot more leftist. Like, right and left are relative things, as I talked about in my the map and the territory review. Right and left are relative things, and as an American and somebody who lived in America for 20-something years, 28 years, a lot of my concept of right and left is very defined by America, and yet Europe is a lot, as a whole, is way more left-leaning by America's standards. So somebody like Houellebecq being on the right, or talking about right or left in a European context, like is kind of different from me as an American. So I nonetheless find Houellebecq's provocations very intriguing and fun to follow in the sense that I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but at the same time, he is an articulate and seems to be a fairly intelligent person, and consequently, I am able to understand a lot more of the fears and insecurities and beliefs of the right wing in a way that not only allows me to kind of appreciate them better than a lot of the shitty ranting that makes up most political discussion online, but also in a way that lets me help better understand my own ground, because I feel like I'm responding to a well-formed argument rather than, again, shitty online discourse. And it also helps me appreciate the common ground that exists between the two, that there's a lot more than I was expecting, which really makes up a lot of this book. I think like 70% of it is preposterous, but I believe that a certain percentage of it is meant to be preposterous. But at the same time, I think that like 30% of it actually really makes sense, and I really find myself agreeing, if not with the exact interpretation or where it ends up, then certainly with a lot of the core sort of problems with society that Houellebecq identifies. And we'll get into that a bit more in the pros and the cons, or the themes, but the reason that I'm talking so much about the context of the book and haven't gotten into the summary is because this is a novel, but in terms of calling it a novel, in terms of having characters with conflicts, there is a main character, and the main character undergoes a kind of arc, but really it is more a political and philosophical think piece than it is a real novel, again, with an in-depth or interesting plot. If you were to map out this plot, it would be very short, very brief, and I will prove it. And to be fair, I kind of said the same thing about the map and the territory, and one of the things that I said about the map and this territory was that the description on the back was kind of crap and misleading. And once again, the description on the back here is kind of misleading as well, and tends to give away the game, because if you read it, it mentions that a certain political party wins, and how that affects the country, and yet at the same time, that doesn't happen until more than halfway through the book. So, and I think that that first half of the book and the tension in the first half of the book is extremely important to understanding the situation, and one of the things that Houellebecq is getting into with how he perceives the decline of European civilization. So my own personal summary, so as to try and give as few spoilers away as possible, even though it's almost impossible not to have the book, this sort of aspect of the book spoiled to you by just reading any description of the book. The story follows a man named François. I'm not sure how you would pronounce it. He is a university professor who exclusively focuses on God. I don't want to pronounce this name because it is so. Here we go. Huysmans, Huysmans. Huysmans. I have no idea. But it's an early French writer whom he specialized in. He wrote a massive thesis on him. It turns out to be 778-page thesis on this writer, whom I don't know, but when I looked him up on Wikipedia, I wasn't surprised to find that I had already looked at his page before, because one of his novels Arebois, which sounds like au revoir, but against nature or against the grain would be the translation, is widely assumed to be the book of debauchery that ruins Dorian Gray in Oliver Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. So I came across it when I read that. So that was a fun connection. At any rate, he is interested in this author, and there's a big political election coming up and in the background. And what ends up happening is there's a runoff election between the alt-right party and the socialist and the leftist party, in which the second place gets taken not by the traditional center-left party, but in this case by a Muslim party, the Muslim Brotherhood. So really what this 50-50 neck-and-neck runoff election is an alt-right, the nationalist front. I don't remember their name, which is funny because I know Le Pen. I know Le Pen is a real figure, and I know a little bit about her and her party. But you have them on one side, and then you have this Muslim Brotherhood on the other side. And it's kind of a 50-50 tops up between the two. So regardless of who wins, there's going to be major changes in France. And to go any further into it, I feel, would be kind of robbing a little bit of the story, even though, like I said, who wins the election is spoiled blatantly on just about everything. So would I recommend this book? You have to be somebody who is pretty open-minded, I think, in order to enjoy or get the most out of this book. Because, like I said, to most right-leaning pundits, it is a call to action, a kind of, see, I told you so, or this is what's going to happen if we're not careful. Whereas I think to most lefts, most people on the left, they see it as a kind of, like I said, Islamophobic takedown of the religion. It definitely has some questionable views on women and the role of women. And I will say that a lot of the facts in the book are very untrue. And it's really interesting because it was written in 2015, but takes place in 2022. So now that we're in 2026, we can definitely see that a lot of the predictions were dead-ass wrong, to put it mildly. But some of them were still right, and we'll get into that a little bit. But it's very easy to be offended by the book, at which point I think that you're just falling into exactly what Houellebecq wants you to believe. I think if you get offended by the book, then you're falling into his trap. And so in that sense, you kind of have to approach it with a fairly open mind, and to be able to get out of it what you can, and just find the kind of thought exercise that he's presenting interesting, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. So going into the pros and the cons. One of the pros that I think about this, and I stand by this very much, even though I know there's going to be a lot of people on both sides who disagree with me, but I think that there is actually a fairly even level of criticism dished out across this book. It brings up certain aspects of Islam that it considers critical, and I can see how most people see it as a book against Islam. And in many ways, there's no doubt in my mind that this is Houellebecq's core belief is anti-Islam. But the way it's presented is really more against the sort of complacency and the absence of, well, okay, that's getting into themes, but I think that there's a certain balance there that I find interesting, and also the way that it's also critical of the far right, as well as the sort of center parties and the current regime. As much as the sort of Islamophobia has come to dominate the conversation around the book, absolutely, and again, whether or not it really constitutes Islamophobia is, I think, really debatable. Separate of Houellebecq's own comments, again, separating kind of author and work in this case, I think the book stands on its own. isn't necessarily anti-Islamophobic, even though there's no doubt in my mind that sort of avoiding this kind of future is the primary intent of the author. I think that as a future, it is presented in a way that most people would be comfortable with, and I'll explore that more in the themes. In terms of the cons, like I said, it's more a book of ideas, a book of thesis, and exploring different arguments and the histories of certain things, and Houellebecq really just writing out his certain beliefs that he holds, than it is necessarily a story. The main character has this journey, but it's really like his conversion comes super late, and most of it takes place in his head rather than external. Like, okay, not to bring him up again, but I'm reminded a lot reading this book of go figure, Murakami, but like specifically Wind Up Bird Chronicle, in the sense that Wind Up Bird Chronicle is very much an idea, a book of ideas, and the main character went through a journey from an inactive bystander into a active agent. But one of the fundamental differences, I think, between the two is in Submission, a lot of the main character's core conversations and debates that ultimately lead him to have this change take place kind of internally or in his engagement with books or other media. Whereas one of the things that I think Murakami does, and Nosgard does this really well too, is a lot of the debates that take place, and they are debates, which is something that I think those authors do pull off a lot better than Houellebecq. They take place as conversation, as dialogue. So rather than reading more like a nonfiction treatise, they feel naturalistic in the way that they're integrated into the story, and they also tend to do a better job of, I think, presenting the situation in a more human way as to what you would expect from a story, rather than necessarily being nonfiction. So I just kind of wish that maybe there was a bit more character to the book, but I don't think it's like the biggest thing in the world. Another pro that I think I kind of appreciated more than the map and the territory is the way the book keeps things kind of strictly linear and strictly centered around Francois. I'm glad that there's not the kind of meta element of including Michel Houellebecq as a character, which was something which confused me in the map and the territory. Like, and again, maybe those are things that'll be things that I eventually think of as a pro if I go back and reread the map and the territory, but which reading the map and the territory after not reading Houellebecq for so long and not really having a firm grasp on Houellebecq as a writer, those meta elements were kind of confusing. So the absence of those meta elements and the more strictly linear story without the break into a mystery story in the third act really kept Submission, I think, a tighter overall package. And that is something also that I really have to admire about this book, is that it is very short. I think I can definitely envision a version of this book that is like 600 pages, and I don't even think I would necessarily hate that book, but to be able to kind of get in, make your point, and get out the way that he does is admirable. And considering there is such an absence of characters and other things, which when I say I wouldn't mind a 600 page version of this book, I'm thinking of it more in the style of a Nosgard or Murakami, where there are more of those characters and whatnot. So for what it is, it's paced very well, and it ends at a nice time. And I'll skip saying that I think the prose is very nice and readable, because I say that in most of my reviews at this point, so fuck it. As for the con, the other con that I'm going to bring up, and I wanted to bring this up last because it kind of transitions into themes. The book does have, for all that I said, that I think the book does a pretty good job of representing Islam as something that could be scary or could be good depending on your view of it, and spreading criticism to the far right and the center party, and in this case, the left. The one group that I think that is really not well represented, and whose opinion you really don't get very much in the story, are women, which seems to be kind of a common problem with Houellebecq's books. A lot of people dislike the way that he portrays women, and I think in this book particularly, it does a great disservice when okay. We're going to stop right here in order to say spoilers. We're going to go into themes from this point out because you can't really tie this con into the book without talking about the main theme of the book, and I just want to put a hard spoiler warning right here for anybody who wants to stop right now. But okay, the main theme of the overall book is submission and the core idea that it's easier to submit to something than it is to stand up and believe in something and fight for something and have something at your core. That there is a need for something at the core, and that fundamentally it is easier for people to submit. And this manifests itself in the conversation towards the end of the book where he's speaking with the he ends up being like the head of universities, but he's really the head of the university who replaces the previous head at the start of the book. And he's a convert to Islam, and he mentions after their conversation that just like people are happier when they submit. Man submitting to God is the same as woman submitting to man. And as long as everybody does this, as long as everybody has their roles, then you end up with a happier, healthier society, just like in these societies of old. And, the sort of conservative ideal around the nuclear family, that it's easier to submit. And when it comes exclusively to woman's submission to man, it's a pity that there is no real representation in this book of the woman's side to this argument. The fact that the character's girlfriend at the start of the book is one of his students and 22 years, I think, younger than him, in terms of the idea that like she's of consenting age, and whatever. So that's the relationship is whatever in terms of the moral rights and wrongs. But in terms of approaching it from an intellectual perspective, she is a pupil and he is a professor. So she is hardly in a not submissive, but a sub position to his authority. Subservient, that's the word I'm looking for. She is the learner, he is the master, and consequently to expect her to accurately embrace the role of the feminist perspective in this story would be ludicrous if she even did, which she doesn't, because she leaves to Israel, and in many ways, the book ends with him converting to Islam, going into a position in which he would have even more authority and whatnot, into a life that would be easier for him because he submits and doesn't think about it, including having women come to him. And he thinks about her and thinks about how she left for a more challenging life, and concludes that his life will be happier than hers. And so it's a pity that we don't get to see, if the idea is that she's meant to stand in for that perspective, then it falls flat. If the idea is that, and there are competent women in the story, I think Maria is her name, Miria, the wife of the Secret Services guy, is also portrayed as a brilliant woman, albeit her looks are, as I recall, considered very unappealing, which is utterly irrelevant, but whatever. She's portrayed as kind of a competent person, and I think Alyssa, I don't remember some of the names, but she's also portrayed as a fairly competent person. But all the women in the book end up that could have an interesting insight into these conversations fall out of the book once the new regime takes over and Sharia law is implemented, which is a real pity, because from that point forward, all you see are women who are happy with the state of things. There's even an observation at one point in the book that women are going to be happier under this system because they can act like children, and then they can have children, and then they'll be surrounded by childhood their whole lives, and they can just act like children their whole lives, which okay. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of women. I think there's going to be a lot of women who take issue with that and take issue with that particular interpretation. But one thing that I do have to say overall that I found really interesting about the book and its overall thesis is I'm reminded of a story that my grandmother told me once of one of her boyfriends went to work in communist. It was Eastern Europe during communist rule. He worked as a tech there, and he would go around and repair things and set up computer systems, and eventually he ended up coming back. And his comment was that there were his belief is that there are many people who would be happy living in a communist regime, because you basically just get told to go to work, you do your job, and then you come home. There's no overtime expected. It's a very simple life. You do what you're told to do, and you don't have to think about anything else outside of that. You don't have to think about your second gig or whatever. You just go, you do your job, you come home, you drink yourself to death, and that's your life. And that there would be many people happy with that. And to me, this belief is another manifestation of the core of the book's idea of submission, that ultimately a lot of people would be very happy to just have their place in life, have it be carved out for them. They don't have to think about it. They just go to work, they go to their assigned role. It's pretty much the same every time. They do their assigned role, they work until their shift ends, and then they go home and they have their little family unit, and then that's it. And that's their entire existence. And they don't have to worry about things like, existential thoughts, wondering who they are, wondering why they're here, wondering about things like identity and gender and politics and things like that, that the majority of people would be happier submitting to a greater power. And that is something that I think that there is a lot of truth to. I don't think that it's enough that it would actually prove to be an effective regime. For instance, while there may certainly be women who do like a traditional household, and I think you still see that. I'm not going to say the trad wife thing, because that's more of an incel thing to my knowledge. But, the idea of women who want to stay home, don't want to work, and want to raise the family, they still exist. People do still want that lifestyle. But even in Muslim countries, there are many, many women who want to be able to have an education. And the way it's portrayed in this book, that which granted, in the book there are women covered up in the university, but the way it's kind of portrayed in this book is all the women are just happy, giggly, and easily convert to this kind of thing. No. That is such a disservice to women. That is such a disservice to their intellect and their capacity for intellect, which granted seems to be something that Houellebecq kind of brushes off. Well, even then, that feels a bit disingenuous, because thinking back to The Map and the Territory, Olga was a very capable and independent woman, and the one police sergeant's wife was also capable. So I don't know if this is Houellebecq just not writing women very well, or if this is just a case of Houellebecq again being provocative and whatever. But I will say that another theme of this book is kind of a desire to return to the traditional nuclear family, which is another point where I disagree. I see... Okay. This is where we start talking about the things that I agree with the book on a core fundamental level, and where I differ with where the book goes with it as it sort of expands out. Houellebecq defines, and I said this in the Map and the Territory review, Houellebecq defines loneliness as one of the core problems in Western society. He calls it in French society, but European society, and really I think Western society. It was a theme in the elementary particles, or atomized. It was a theme in the map and the territory, and it's a theme in submission. And it is one thing that, at its core, I do absolutely believe is a problem. And considering the map and the territory was published in 2010, submission was published in 2015, and the elementary particles was published, I don't remember, but I think it was like 2001. So really before the rise of social media and all the stuff that we found today, I think that it is absolutely true that loneliness and isolation have been one of the leading problems with what I attribute to the neoliberalist neoliberalist capitalist ideal, and which he just kind of attributes nice, which he kind of just attributes to the government in general, and the establishment, quote, that's not literally what he says, but the general establishment, and in the sense that the neoliberalist capital system is the established system, I tend to agree with him on that. So we both agree that there is a loneliness crisis, and one of the other big points that has come up in Atomized and now this is that in absentia, the spiritual drive. I mentioned this in the map and the territory, but or review. But my personal view on it is you have the pre-modernist age, which was mainly dominated by religion. You had the modernist age, which was dominated by nationalism and science. And then now we're in the postmodernist age, which is not defined by anything, which is mostly, as far as I can tell, defined by existentialism and nihilism, because there is nothing at that core. And this leads to what I personally call a spiritual void, in the sense that it's not necessarily literally spiritualism, but it is the idea that people need something to believe in that is greater than themselves. And the idea that, whether this needs to be a god, whether this needs to be, like I said, science, whether this is the concept of nation, whether this is the concept of family, people need something at their core to believe in that is bigger than themselves. And I'm just repeating myself, but just to really emphasize that point, people need something to believe in. They need to believe that this life, this existence, means something beyond just that meaning itself. And while I personally am able to make my own meaning and purpose for existence, I also appreciate very much that there are a lot of people who can't do that. And I don't necessarily think that they're inherently weaker people for it. It is what it is. It is a reality that the majority of people don't have that kind of strength to it. And when you put these two things together, what you end up with is where we're kind of at, a society of lonely and, broadly speaking, unhappy people. And people who will kind of tear themselves down from the inside. So in that sense, I agree with Houellebecq. Houellebecq seems to be suggesting in submission that if there is not a return to more traditional European values, in this case kind of manifest in the Catholic Church, in the traditional nuclear family, in those kind of ideas, then what will happen is that an external version of traditional values will come in and fill that spiritual void that the neoliberal capitalist regime is failing to provide for people via traditional Islam law and via Sharia law and this new family unit. So this is where I agree with him that there is a loneliness epidemic, that the current neoliberalist capitalist regime leaves a void in people. I would extend that to say that personally, I don't hate capitalism, but I think that right now, capitalism, I don't like neoliberal capitalism, but also the idea that capitalism on its own, that the pursuit of capital is going to fill the void for people, that spiritual void, that spiritual need, is not only absurd, but it creates an environment in which the absolute worst kinds of people are rising to the top and succeeding and becoming the most powerful people, which is not what you want at all. So in that sense, we agree, but I don't necessarily agree that there is going to be a return to religion, which in fact, the book states multiple times that a return to religion is inevitable. And I think that this is something that Houellebecq really believes, going back into atomized, digging into my memory. It's been a while. I think there were traces of that too. But in fact, on the contrary, religion in the West continues to be on a decline. And even the numbers, like in the U.S., that talk about the rise of a new young Christian generation are, if you actually look into how the statistics are counted, grossly overmeasured, because actually statistically new families are less likely, not new families, but families and children are actually less likely to be religious than their parents, and more younger people, or fewer and fewer younger people rather, are converting. So in the sense that I believe that we are coming to a reckoning with the current system, and that I don't necessarily know about civil war, but in the sense that some kind of massive internal reckoning is inevitable, that I absolutely, and it is the consequence of a system which places at its core capital, which I don't want this to turn into a political channel, but I feel like in order to sort of slightly justify my own stance, if you go for a purely ideological system like communism, then you're not accounting for human infallibility, and it ends up collapsing. But if you go for a system like capitalism, which has at its core nothing but the pursuit of capital, and you make that the center of your existence, of your society, then the worst people come to the top, because the good people have nothing really to work for, and society needs more to work towards than just capital. So some kind of reckoning, I think, is inevitable. And one of the big things about this book that I think is really, really interesting is the way in which you see the way in which the concept sounds sort of utterly absurd. Like Sharia law is passed in France overnight, and even now I'm a little bit sketchy on it. But the thing is, having been an American, granted I haven't been in America, but having seen the stuff that Trump has gotten away with during his second term, seeing the overturning of so many civil liberties, seeing Roe v. Wade get overturned by a completely corrupt Supreme Court, and seeing how these things happen, and people ultimately they protest, but they go along with it. I am no longer completely able to brush off the possibility of these extreme changes in politics, because I have observed them happening. And that's where I find the earlier part of the book really interesting, because you have a situation in which you have inevitably your future either being defined by an alt-right, which is violent, which is inept, which is populist, and which is a dictatorship, or a far left, which is radical, which is oppressive in terms of thoughts and ideas, and which will reshape, the core. It's the horseshoe effect, ultimately. And really the reason, and I'm not saying that the Democrats are that in an American context. On the contrary, the Democrats, to me, stand in for what the book calls like the center left and the center right, these sort of parties that are so inept and corrupt that they lose people's trust and they lose people's faith to the point that it allows these sort of extremist parties grounds to get in and change things and make their extremist views a reality. And how really more than anything, more than this book being a criticism of Islam, more than this book being a criticism of the far right, what I really see this book as is a criticism of the current status quo and its failure to address the sort of needs of people to have something in their life that is more than just, go to work, make money, and then buy things. Filling yourself with consumerist goods and, living what most people would call a comfortable life. Like there needs to be something more to it. And I think this is really embodied in the main character retiring with his pension, being able to continue to live a comfortable life, doing absolutely nothing if he wants, but finding it completely empty, finding that he has no human connection with anybody, finding that he has no relationships with anybody. And, even though he has the money and even though he has the material goods, there's an emptiness there that leads him to contemplate suicide multiple times. And that's exactly what, at least if I disagree with Houellebecq's fears of the future in terms of, this sort of Muslim regime or Islam regime or whatever, I certainly agree that there is a massive failing on the part of current Western society to address these issues. And in that sense, I have definitely gotten something out of reading Submission. It's really, like I said, it's interesting, the things that I absolutely disagree with, the things that I think are absolutely stupid, but where the common ground is. And, again, like I said, it splits off in different ways, but it comes, and I see this a lot in U.S. politics, that people who identify on the left and people who identify on the right typically tend to have a lot more in common in terms of people identifying what they see as the problems. Where they really start to diverge is in how to address those problems. And I think that's so interesting because it suggests that even as we are more and more stratified and extremist, it paradoxically comes from a place of commonality, and how can we all sort of identify the problems and agree on the problems and yet find ourselves in such extreme contradiction? And that's really where I want to leave Submission on, because like I said, as somebody who disagrees with a lot of what this book says, nonetheless, I found it a very interesting read, and I think that anybody who approaches it with an open mind can find something interesting in here as well. So join me next time when I talk about, I think next I'm going to go with Hard Like Water by Yao Lane. We'll see. See you then.